The sun beat down relentlessly on our graduation ceremony, making my black robe feel like a portable sauna. I stood in a long line of nervous students, all of us sweating both from the heat and the anticipation of this milestone moment. Around me, I could hear the happy whispers of families and the constant rustle of polyester gowns as we prepared to walk across that important stage. My own heart was pounding like a drum solo in my chest, but my nervousness came from more than just the ceremony itself. As I scanned the crowded bleachers, my eyes immediately found my Aunt Victoria sitting perfectly straight in the front row, looking completely untouched by the sweltering heat. Her expensive, ice blue dress stood out sharply against all the casual summer outfits surrounding her. And her posture was so perfect, she might have had a ruler strapped to her back. When her eyes met mine, her lips curved into one of her rare small smiles, and for that beautiful second, I felt a wave of pure happiness wash over me. Since my parents' tragic accident 5 years earlier, Victoria had been my only living relative, the only person I could truly call family. In that moment, I truly believed her smile was meant just for me, a silent praise for all my hard work in college. As I stepped down from the stage, my new diploma case feeling wonderfully solid in my hands, she pulled me into a quick, somewhat stiff hug that felt more like a formal greeting than a celebration. "Adequately done, Clara," she said, her voice crisp and clear like the autumn air she loved so much. "Now your real life begins. I've arranged a junior executive position for you at the corporate headquarters. You will start next Monday. The family legacy must be continued, and you are now responsible for upholding it." My own happy smile suddenly froze on my face, feeling stiff and unnatural. My fingers automatically found the small, apple-shaped necklace my best friend Anna had slipped into my hand just moments earlier. "For the world's best teacher," she had whispered into my ear during our celebratory hug. The heavy secret I'd been carrying about my career choice now settled in my stomach like a cold, hard stone, completely spoiling the warm summer day's joy. Several days after the graduation ceremony ended, I found myself sitting on the worn wooden floor of my small apartment, surrounded by half-packed cardboard boxes that smelled of dust and change. Sunlight streamed through the single window, highlighting dancing dust motes in the air. In my slightly trembling hands, I held the most important piece of paper I'd ever received, a formal job offer letter. The paper wasn't for some fancy downtown corporate job with a fancy title. This was a teaching contract from Northwood Middle School, a place I'd come to love during my student teaching semester. As I read the formal words for what felt like the 100th time, my mind drifted back to those chaotic, wonderful months in Mrs. Higgins' classroom. I remembered the cracked linoleum floors, the outdated world maps pinned to the walls, the constant smell of old books and chalk dust, and the way the other teachers always joked about their tiny classroom budgets. Despite all its flaws, that vibrant, noisy classroom had felt more like home to me than my aunt's silent, perfect mansion ever had. My thoughts particularly focused on one student, a quiet girl named Maya, who hid in the back row. She struggled desperately with reading, her confidence so low she could barely look anyone in the eye. I'd spent countless after-school hours with her, sitting at that wobbly little table, practicing words with endless patience. I would never forget the glorious day when she finally read an entire paragraph aloud without a single mistake, her face suddenly transforming with a brilliant, triumphant smile that seemed to light up the entire dusty classroom. That single moment of breakthrough, that beautiful spark of understanding and self-pride shining in her young eyes, felt more valuable to me than any corporate bonus or fancy job title ever could. It was right then I knew, with absolute certainty deep in my soul, that teaching wasn't just a job for me. It was my true calling, my purpose for being alive. Exactly 1 week after I'd moved the last box into my apartment, the expected summons finally arrived. My Aunt Victoria's personal assistant called, her voice professionally smooth, to inform me that Mrs. Thorne expected my presence for a celebratory dinner at the family estate that evening. I put on my best simple black dress, feeling both nervous and determined as I drove through the imposing iron gates of the property I'd once called home. The mansion always felt too quiet, like a museum after closing hours, every expensive artifact perfectly in place and untouched by real life. The impossibly long dining table, which could comfortably seat 25 guests, seemed to stretch into eternity, and as usual, it was set only for the two of us at one end, making me feel small and isolated in the vast, echoing space. The crystal glasses and polished silverware gleamed under the harsh light of the chandelier, and the only sounds were the soft clicks of our utensils against the fine china. Through the first two courses, Aunt Victoria detailed my new corporate responsibilities with military precision. Then, during the dessert course, she finally paused and looked directly at me. "The paperwork for your position is ready for your signature tomorrow morning at 9, she stated, her tone leaving no room for discussion. This was my moment. I took a deep, shaky breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Aunt Victoria," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity, truly, but I've accepted another position." She slowly set her fork down, the gentle clink sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Another position? With which competing firm? I wasn't aware you were interviewing elsewhere." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "It's not with a firm. I've been hired as a 7th grade English teacher at Northwood Middle School. I start in August." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the next room. Her face, usually a mask of cool control, seemed to harden into solid stone. For a long, terrifying moment, my Aunt Victoria simply stared at me, her expression completely unreadable. Then a slow, cold smile spread across her lips, a sight far more frightening than any outburst of anger could have been. She carefully dabbed the corners of her mouth with her linen napkin, placed it neatly beside her plate, and leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving my face. "A teacher," she finally said, the word dripping with icy disdain. "You wish to spend your life as a glorified babysitter, wiping noses and handing out crayons to snot-nosed children for a poverty-level salary." She shook her head slowly, as if she truly felt sorry for my poor judgment. "I paid for your expensive education, Clara. I provided you with every advantage. I ensured you would have a future of influence and respectability. And you want to throw all of that away to become a public servant." She said those last two words as if they left a bad taste in her mouth. I tried to speak, to explain the importance of the work, the joy I found in it, but she held up a single, perfectly manicured hand, instantly silencing me. "Let me be perfectly clear," she continued, her voice dropping to a deadly calm tone. "If you are foolish enough to pursue this pathetic career path, you will be making a conscious choice. A choice to reject this family, to reject me, and to reject the legacy I have built. If you sign that teaching contract, I will cut you out of my will completely. You will receive nothing. Not a single share, not a single property, not a single dollar. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" The finality in her voice felt like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and stunned in my chair. I drove home from my aunt's mansion that night in a complete daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Her ultimatum echoed in my mind, a relentless, cold loop. "You will receive nothing." The weight of her words pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. On one hand, there was the life she offered, a secure, luxurious future filled with financial comfort and societal status, everything she believed I should want. On the other hand, there was my teaching contract, a symbol of the difficult, often thankless but deeply meaningful path I had chosen for myself. I thought of Maya's smiling face, that brilliant moment of triumph in the classroom. I thought of the difference I could make in young lives. But I also thought of the student loans I still had to pay, the tiny apartment I could barely afford, the constant financial struggle that lay ahead without my aunt's support. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my floor, holding the teaching contract in one hand and an old faded photograph of my aunt and me from a happier time in the other. In the photo, I was about 10 years old, and she was actually smiling a real, genuine smile, her arm around my shoulders. I stared at that photo until the first rays of morning sun peeked through my window, my heart aching with a profound sense of loss. But as the room grew brighter, so did my resolve. I knew what I had to do. I picked up a pen, its weight feeling monumental in my hand. With a deep, steadying breath, I signed my name on the dotted line of the teaching contract. The decision was made. The first thing I did, after signing the teaching contract, was walk to the blue mailbox on the corner. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the envelope. As it slipped from my fingers into the dark slot, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. It was done. There was no turning back now. I stood there for a full minute, just staring at the mailbox, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The finality of that simple action, sending a piece of paper through the mail, felt like it had just determined the entire course of my future. When I got back to my apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. I knew I had to tell my aunt. Delaying would only make it worse. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over her number in my contacts. For a moment, I considered calling, but I knew I wouldn't be able to get the words out. So I typed out a simple text message instead, my fingers clumsy on the screen. I've signed the contract with Northwood Middle School. This is the path I have chosen for my life. I hope one day you can understand. I read it over 3 times, then held my breath and pressed send. The response came almost instantly, a cold, hard vibration in my hand that made me jump. It wasn't a long, angry message trying to convince me otherwise. It was just 5 brutal, unforgiving words. You've made your bed, lie in it. I read those words over and over, each time feeling a fresh wave of sadness wash over me. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship, a door slamming shut with absolute finality. A few days later, a formal, typed letter arrived on heavy, expensive stationery from her lawyer. The language was dense with legal terms I didn't fully understand, but the meaning was perfectly, painfully clear. I had been officially and permanently removed from Victoria Thorne's last will and testament. Reading those cold, legal words felt like reading my own obituary in her world. My first year of teaching was, without a doubt, the most challenging period of my entire life. I learned very quickly and harshly what my aunt had meant by lying in the bed I'd made. My teacher's salary was so small that after paying my rent and my student loans, I had almost nothing left over for groceries, let alone any kind of social life. I remember one week specifically, counting out loose change from a jar on my counter to buy a single loaf of bread and some peanut butter for my dinners. I often spent my own meager money on basic classroom supplies. Pencils that kept disappearing, notebooks that filled up too fast, boxes of tissues for runny noses, and even simple snacks for students who I knew came to school hungry because they hadn't eaten since their free lunch the day before. My apartment was a tiny, cramped studio that felt even smaller and more lonely after long, exhausting days dealing with 30 energetic teenagers. I spent my evenings grading piles of papers at a wobbly second-hand table and planning lessons far into the night, my eyes straining in the dim light. The work was relentless and emotionally draining. There were days I came home so tired I would fall asleep still wearing my coat, too exhausted to even make a cup of tea. But amidst the struggle and the sheer exhaustion, there were these brilliant, shining moments that made everything worthwhile. Moments when a struggling student finally grasped a difficult concept, their face lighting up with that aha expression of understanding. Moments when my entire class would laugh at a silly joke I made during a lesson, the sound of their laughter feeling like a physical warmth in the room. And there was Maya, now in the 8th grade, who would sometimes stop by my classroom just to say hello and quietly tell me about a book she was reading. She was thriving, her confidence growing every single day, a complete transformation from the shy, defeated girl I had met 2 years earlier. While my bank account was pathetically empty, my heart felt incredibly full in a way it never had before. I was building something real, something that mattered, one student at a time, even if no one in my former life could ever see its value. One perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon in my 2nd year of teaching, I was stacking worn-out textbooks on a shelf when my principal, Mr. Adams, rushed into my classroom, out of breath. His face was flushed with excitement, and he was waving a single sheet of paper in his hand like a victory flag. "Clara, you will not believe this," he exclaimed, his voice several pitches higher than normal. "We've just received an enormous, anonymous donation. It's specifically for your classroom and your literacy programs." My jaw literally dropped open in shock. I took the formal letter from his trembling hands. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, stating that a private benefactor had been impressed with the dedication and innovative spirit of my work. The funds were to be used solely at my discretion to inspire greatness and foster a love of learning in my students. The amount listed at the bottom made me feel so dizzy, I had to reach out and steady myself on a desk. I sat down heavily in my own chair, my mind reeling with 1,000 questions, a tornado of confusion and disbelief. Who would do this? Who even knew about my little program, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the school district? I thought of Anna, my best friend, but she was a struggling artist and didn't have that kind of money. I thought of other family, but there was no one else. The mystery was as overwhelming as the generosity itself. I felt a strange, conflicting mixture of immense gratitude and a deep, nagging suspicion that I couldn't quite shake, a feeling that this was too good to be true. With the mysterious funds now available and sitting in a dedicated school account, my classroom underwent an incredible transformation that felt like something from a dream. It was like someone had given me a magic wand and told me to create the classroom I had always envisioned. I was able to purchase 30 brand new tablets loaded with interactive learning software that the students adored, their faces glued to the screens as they practiced grammar and vocabulary in a way that felt like a game. I bought a whole new classroom library filled with current, exciting young adult novels that the students actually fought over to read during silent reading time. I started an after-school creative writing club that became so popular we had to create a waiting list. I even organized a visiting author series, bringing real, published writers into the classroom to inspire my students and show them that their own stories mattered. The change in the students was electric and palpable. You could feel the excitement for learning in the air. Engagement in my classes skyrocketed. Even my most reluctant readers were suddenly asking for book recommendations. My classroom was no longer just a room with 4 walls. It became a vibrant, colorful hub of activity and learning, a true sanctuary for so many kids who needed a safe, encouraging place to be. I kept meticulous records of every single dollar I spent, saving all the receipts and invoices in a large, organized binder, just in case the anonymous donor ever asked for an accounting. I often lay awake at night, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, running through a mental list of everyone I knew who could possibly have that much money and a reason to give it to me. Only one name ever came to mind, but I dismissed it immediately as an impossible fantasy. Aunt Victoria had made her feelings perfectly, painfully clear. She would never, ever support my teaching career. It had to be someone else, but the question of who kept me up many nights, staring into the darkness, wondering. About 6 months after the initial donation, I was reorganizing the new bookshelves after school, humming to myself, when a man in an impeccably tailored, expensive-looking suit appeared in my classroom doorway. He looked utterly out of place, a stark contrast to the colorful, slightly messy energy of the room. His sharp, critical eyes scanned the colorful posters and student artwork plastered on the walls with a hint of clear distaste, as if he were assessing a failed business venture. "Can I help you?" I asked, wiping a smudge of dust from my cheek, suddenly self-conscious. "Clara Thorne?" he said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. When I nodded, he introduced himself without offering a hand to shake. "I'm Jonathan Pierce, a senior associate with your aunt's legal team." My blood ran cold at the mention of my aunt. He stepped inside, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the worn, slightly stained carpet. "I was in the neighborhood on other business, and Mrs. Thorne thought I should stop by. She wanted me to see firsthand how you were managing." His gaze swept over the room again, lingering on a lopsided clay pot a student had made for me, a look of pity in his eyes. "She sends her," continued disappointment. The way he said it, with a faint, condescending smile that didn't reach his eyes, made it crystal clear the message was his own interpretation. He was there to gloat, to see the bed I had made for myself with his own eyes, and to report back to my aunt on my humble, pathetic life. After Jonathan Pierce's unwelcome and unsettling visit, a new steely sense of determination settled deep within me. I was no longer just a passionate young teacher trying to make a difference. I was someone who needed to protect the world I had built from the judgment and potential interference of my aunt's powerful, money-driven world. I started documenting everything with the careful precision of a journalist, building a case. I bought a simple, black and white composition notebook and began keeping a detailed journal, noting the date, time, and content of every interaction, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, with anyone connected to my aunt. I saved every email in a dedicated folder, and after carefully checking the legalities of recording conversations in my state, began secretly recording audio on my phone whenever Jonathan or any of my aunt's other associates called or visited me. I also started quietly researching my aunt's vast business empire online late at night, reading articles and annual reports, trying to understand the world she valued so much more than mine. I didn't have a specific plan for this collected information, but a gut feeling told me that having a clear, factual, time-stamped record might become important someday. I was building my own defense, a paper and digital trail that proved my integrity and her relentless campaign to undermine my choices, just in case I ever needed to prove that I wasn't the villain in her story. The spring of my second year of teaching brought an incredible highlight that made all the struggles and sacrifices feel profoundly worth it. Maya, my once struggling reader who could barely look me in the eye, entered the district's annual STEM fair. With the new resources from the anonymous donation, she had been able to conduct a sophisticated, well-designed experiment on plant growth using different types of light, creating a beautiful and scientific display. Her project was not only visually impressive, but also methodologically sound. It won first place at the school level and then went on to sweep the entire regional competition, earning her a full scholarship to a prestigious summer science program at a major university. A local news channel even came to the school to do a feature story on her amazing success against the odds, a classic feel-good piece for the evening news. The segment prominently featured me as her inspirational teacher, the one who had first unlocked her love for learning, back when she was struggling. They filmed inside my vibrant, technology-filled classroom, and I spoke briefly and nervously about the critical importance of supporting every student's potential, no matter their starting point or background. The piece aired on the evening news. I never knew for sure if my aunt saw it, but a small, fierce part of me hoped that she had been sitting in her silent mansion and had seen the real, tangible good I was doing in the world she so clearly despised. It felt like a quiet, personal victory, a validation of my choice that I didn't need but deeply appreciated. 2 relatively peaceful, fulfilling years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. My life had found a comfortable, happy rhythm centered entirely around my school, my students, and the small community I had built for myself. The mystery of the anonymous donor still lingered in the back of my mind like an unsolved puzzle, but I had mostly learned to live with the unanswered question, accepting it as a wonderful, life-changing gift. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, my personal cell phone buzzed loudly during my precious that planning period, startling me as I was grading a stack of essays. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but the area code was from the city's most exclusive neighborhood, the one where my aunt lived. I answered cautiously, my teacher voice automatically switching on. "Clara Thorne?" A professionally smooth, unfamiliar male voice inquired. When I confirmed it was me, he continued, his tone flat and efficient. "This is Jonathan Pierce from the law firm of Sterling and Pierce. I'm calling to inform you that your aunt, Victoria Thorne, passed away last night." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, a sudden punch to the chest that knocked the air from my lungs. I sank into my desk chair, the world suddenly tilting on its axis, the colorful posters on the walls blurring into meaningless shapes. He continued, his voice devoid of any real emotion, as if he were reading from a script. "The reading of the last will and testament is scheduled for this Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning at the family estate. Your presence is expected." There was a deliberate, heavy pause, and I could almost hear his smug smile through the phone, a silent, "I told you so. I think you'll find the final arrangements particularly interesting." The way he said, "interesting," sent a cold, foreboding shiver straight down my spine. The funeral service was a cold, somber, and deeply impersonal affair held in a massive, echoing cathedral downtown that my aunt had occasionally attended for appearances. It was filled with powerful-looking business people, politicians, and socialites, all dressed in expensive dark clothing that whispered of money, influence, and a certain kind of coldness. I sat alone in a back pew, feeling like a complete imposter, a ghost at my own family's event, an outsider looking in on a world I had voluntarily left behind. The few distant family members who recognized me offered stiff, polite nods from a distance, but kept their physical and emotional distance, as if my life choices were a contagious disease they might catch. Jonathan Pierce gave the main eulogy, a speech filled with glowing, formal praise for Victoria's ruthless business acumen, her uncompromising standards, and the powerful, lasting legacy she built from the ground up. Throughout his carefully crafted speech, his eyes repeatedly found mine in the crowd, and each time it felt like a subtle, public accusation aimed directly at my heart. He spoke of her deep, profound disappointment in those who failed to meet her sky-high expectations, who chose foolish sentimentality over clear-eyed strength and messy emotion over pure, clean ambition. I felt the eyes of the entire congregation on me at those moments, as if they all knew, without a doubt, that he was talking about me, the disappointing niece who had chosen crayons over corporations, chalk dust over stock charts. It was the loneliest I had ever felt in a room full of people. On Friday morning, with a nervous, churning stomach and a black dress I hadn't worn in years, I walked back into my aunt's mansion for the first time since our fateful dinner years ago. The air in the grand living room was still and heavy, with a greedy, palpable kind of anticipation. The same group of powerful, serious-faced people from the funeral sat in elegant, uncomfortable-looking chairs, their expressions carefully schooled into masks of solemnity that couldn't quite hide their curiosity. Jonathan Pierce stood confidently behind a polished mahogany desk that gleamed under the crystal chandelier, a thick, formal document bound in leather held in his hands. He began to read the will in a clear, practiced, monotone voice, the words flowing out like a river of legalese and immense figures. The amounts of money and the names of various assets were absolutely staggering, numbers I could barely comprehend, sums that represented lifetimes of wealth. He bequeathed vast sums to longtime business partners, endowed chairs at prestigious universities, and donated millions to her favorite charities, which I noted were all related to the arts and economic development. There was nothing, not a single dollar, mentioned for anything related to education. He read for what felt like an hour, listing international properties, complex stock portfolios, and a catalog of valuable art collections. He even announced a generous, prearranged bequest to himself, a reward for his loyal and invaluable service over the years. My name was not mentioned once. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking, mentally preparing myself for the final, official, public confirmation of my disinheritance, the last act of my aunt's rejection that would now be witnessed by everyone who had ever doubted my choices. Jonathan Pierce finally looked up from the lengthy document, a smirk of satisfaction playing on his thin lips. He glanced around the room, making eye contact with a few of the key beneficiaries, his gaze finally resting on me with a look of pure, unadulterated pity, as if I were a lost puppy. He made a show of slowly preparing to close the heavy leather binder, smoothing his hand over the cover, as if the main event was conclusively over and the real business had been concluded. "And to my niece, Clara Thorne," he began, his tone now dripping with condescending mockery, the words drawn out for maximum dramatic effect. He paused for a long, dramatic moment, letting the silence stretch out, making sure every person in the room was hanging on his next word, setting the stage for the punchline. The room was utterly still, everyone waiting for the final insult, the expected punchline to the joke of my life and my poor choices. Who willfully chose a life of poverty and menial labor over the legacy offered to her? He paused again, clearly relishing this moment of public humiliation he had been waiting years to deliver, his moment of victory over the wayward niece. I lowered my head, staring at my scuffed practical shoes, bracing for the final blow, the confirmation that I would receive nothing but her eternal scorn and a lifetime of silent judgment from these people. I clenched my fists in my lap, my nails digging into my palms, just waiting for it all to be over so I could escape back to my own real world. But the final, expected, brutal blow didn't come. Instead, there was a strange, choked, guttural sound from the direction of the desk. My head snapped up in confusion. Jonathan Pierce was staring down at the document, his face a mask of utter confusion and dawning horror. The smug, self-satisfied smirk had vanished from his face, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He blinked several times rapidly, as if he were trying to clear his vision, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing on the page in front of him. He cleared his throat roughly, a harsh sound in the quiet room. But when he spoke again, his once smooth and confidently arrogant voice was now shaky, uncertain, and weak. I bequeath the entire remainder of my estate, he read, stumbling over the words like they were physical obstacles, including all controlling shares in Thorne Industries, all real property holdings, the art collection, and all other assets not specifically mentioned herein. He had to stop and swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously, his hand trembling slightly as he held the paper, the confident lawyer completely gone. Valued at approximately $285 million. The number hung in the air, vast and impossible and utterly world-shattering. A dead, profound, and heavy silence instantly swallowed the entire room immediately after the staggering number was spoken aloud. It was so complete and heavy I could hear my own heart hammering wildly in my ears, a frantic, panicked drumbeat of sheer shock. No one moved. No one seemed to even remember how to breathe. All eyes were fixed on Jonathan Pierce, whose face had now turned a sickly greenish shade of gray. He looked from the document to the stunned, frozen faces in the room and back again, as if hoping the words had magically changed or disappeared between glances. He muttered, "This can't be right. This is a mistake, a typo," under his breath. But it was loud enough for everyone in the front rows to hear, breaking the spell of silence. The eerie, absolute quiet was then broken by a soft, collective intake of breath from the crowd, a giant gasp that swept through the room, followed immediately by the beginning of confused, frantic whispers that quickly grew in volume into a roar of disbelief and speculation. I just sat there, completely frozen in my chair, my body numb, my mind a complete and total blank white static, completely unable to process the immense, life-altering number I had just heard. $285 million. It was an amount from a fantasy, a number from a movie, not something that could possibly be connected to my simple, ordinary life. Jonathan Pierce, looking utterly panicked, lost, and out of his depth, frantically scanned the page again, his finger tracing the lines of text as if he could physically wipe the words away. He was desperately searching for a loophole, a condition, a hidden clause, a footnote. Anything at all that would reverse or nullify the unbelievable, devastating words he had just been forced to read aloud to this audience. Finding nothing but the stark, clear text, he looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of sheer shock and a kind of terrified personal fury, as if this were a personal betrayal designed to humiliate him. He had no choice. The law required him to finish reading the section. In a hollow, defeated, almost inaudible whisper that everyone in the deathly silent room had to strain to hear, he read the final, stunning, poetic clause. "The title of this bequest," he whispered, the words seeming to physically pain him as they left his mouth, "shall be the Victoria Thorne Foundation for Educational Excellence." He took another ragged, shaky breath, his shoulders slumping in utter defeat and humiliation as he read the last devastating sentence. "And to my favorite teacher." His voice broke on the word teacher, the sound cracking through the room, barely audible. "My brilliant niece, Clara. You were, and always will be, the best and most important investment I ever made." The words, so full of a hidden, proud love she had never ever shown me in life, echoed in the profound, shocked silence, hanging in the air for a long moment before the room erupted. The room exploded into instant, furious chaos after the final, loving words were spoken. The previously dignified, composed, wealthy guests were immediately on their feet, shouting questions and exclamations of pure, unadulterated disbelief. "This is outrageous. one red-faced man bellowed, slamming his fist on the arm of his chair. She must have been coerced into this in her final days. A woman dressed in expensive furs cried out, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly in my direction, as if I were a master criminal. Jonathan Pierce slammed his hand flat on the polished wood of the desk, the sharp, loud crack echoing through the room like a gunshot. His face was contorted with a rage I had never seen on a human being before, a pure, venomous hatred. "This document is a forgery," he shouted, his voice cracking with the strain of his fury. "It has to be. Victoria would never have done this. She disowned this girl years ago. She told me so herself." He glared at me across the room as if I were a serpent he had let into the garden, a fraud who had personally orchestrated this entire situation to steal what was rightfully his. The other lawyers in the room began gathering around him, speaking in low, urgent, panicked tones, their own calm, professional facades completely shattered by this unbelievable, catastrophic turn of events. I remained seated, a silent, stunned island in the storm of their anger, confusion, and outright greed, still trying to make my brain understand the earthquake that had just shattered the foundation of my world. The chaos in the room seemed to swirl around me, but I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching the scene from a great distance. The shouts and accusations were just a dull roar in my ears. My mind was still stuck on my aunt's words, the ones Jonathan Pierce had just read. My favorite teacher. She had never, not once, called me that to my face. She had never even acknowledged my profession without a sneer. As Jonathan continued to argue with the other lawyers, a side door to the study opened quietly. An older man with kind eyes and silver hair stepped into the room. He was dressed in a simple, elegant suit, and he carried an air of calm authority that immediately cut through the noise. "That will be enough, Jonathan," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to the newcomer. Jonathan Pierce looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered, "I was just explaining that this document cannot be authentic." The older man, Mr. Sterling, merely smiled a sad, knowing smile. "I can assure you, it is entirely authentic. I drafted it myself at Victoria's specific and repeated instructions over the last 18 months. Mr. Sterling walked over to me, ignoring the stunned stares of everyone in the room. He held out a sealed, cream-colored envelope. "For you, Clara," he said gently. "From your aunt. She asked that I give this to you after the reading, regardless of the outcome." My hands trembled as I took it. I broke the seal with my thumb and pulled out a single sheet of my aunt's heavy monogrammed stationery. Her elegant, sharp handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Clara," it began, and just seeing those words made my throat tighten. "If you are reading this, then you know the truth. I was too proud and stubborn to say it to your face, but you were right. I was wrong. Your choice was not a rejection of my legacy. It was the creation of your own. I tested your resolve, and you proved yourself stronger and more principled than anyone in this room. The anonymous donations were from me. I needed to see what you would do with the resources, if your passion was real. You built a sanctuary, not a business. You have more strength and integrity than all of these vultures combined. The money is not a reward. It is a tool. Use it to teach them all a final lesson about what truly matters in this life. With love and a pride I failed to show, Aunt Victoria." A single tear escaped and splashed onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. It was the first time she had ever told me she loved me. Mr. Sterling turned to address the room, his voice ringing with clear legal authority. "The will is valid and has been witnessed and notarized according to all state laws. The estate in its entirety passes to Clara Thorne, to be held and managed within the structure of the Victoria Thorne Foundation for Educational Excellence." He then looked directly at Jonathan Pierce, his expression turning stern. "Jonathan, your services are no longer required by the Thorne estate or the foundation. Security will escort you from the premises to collect your personal effects from your office." Jonathan's face was a thundercloud of humiliation and rage. He opened his mouth to protest, but two security guards who had appeared at the door moved to flank him. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed out, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. The family members and business partners who had been shunning me just minutes before now began to inch closer, their faces rearranged into masks of false warmth and sudden familiarity. They started offering stilted congratulations, but I barely heard them. I just kept looking down at the letter in my hands, feeling the weight of my aunt's apology and her belief in me, a gift more valuable than all the money in the world. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined, but I clung fiercely to the person I had become. I didn't move into my aunt's mansion. I put it up for sale, its proceeds destined for the foundation. I didn't quit my job. Instead, I stood in front of my principal, Mr. Adams, with a proposal he could never refuse. A week later, I stood at a press conference at Northwood Middle School, surrounded by my students and colleagues. Microphones were pushed toward me, cameras flashed. "The Victoria Thorne Foundation," I announced, my voice clear and strong, "will begin its work here at Northwood. Our first project will be a complete renovation of the school, followed by the establishment of a permanent fund to support teacher salaries, classroom supplies, and after-school programs. This is just the beginning." I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of my students filled with hope. I wasn't a corporate executive. I was a teacher with the means to change the entire system, and that was a power my aunt had finally understood. One of my first official acts was to call Maya and her family into my classroom after school. The room was quiet and filled with the soft, late afternoon light. "Maya," I said, smiling at the bright, confident young woman she had become, "the foundation has its first full scholarship to offer. It will cover your tuition, room, board, and books for any university you choose to attend, for all 4 years." Her mother burst into tears of joy, clutching her daughter's hand. Maya's eyes widened, filling with tears of her own. "You did this," she whispered. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." I shook my head, my own eyes misty. "No, Maya. You did the work. You found your own strength. I just helped you clear the path. This scholarship is just making sure that path stays clear." It was the perfect start, a way to ensure that the first student who showed me the true impact of teaching would have every opportunity she deserved. The cycle of inspiration was now fully funded, and it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. A few months later, I stood in my transformed classroom. The walls were still colorful, but the furniture was new. The technology was state-of-the-art, and the bookshelves were overflowing. On the wall, I had hung a small, simple, framed portrait of my Aunt Victoria. It was a picture from a time before the bitterness, where she had a hint of a real smile. I looked at it, then turned to face the camera crew that was finishing up a documentary segment on the foundation. The reporter had asked for a final message. I took a deep breath and spoke directly to the lens, imagining all the people who might be watching, all the people who had been told their dreams weren't good enough. "They told me I wasn't making a difference," I said, my voice steady and sure. "They said I was wasting my potential, that I was choosing a life of poverty over success. But they were wrong. The greatest legacy we can leave isn't a fortune you hold in your hands. It's the wisdom you plant in someone's mind, the courage you ignite in their heart. Don't ever let anyone devalue your passion or tell you that your dream is too small. The most powerful revenge is not wealth or recognition. It is a life lived meaningfully, with purpose and love, completely on your own terms." I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. My aunt's final lesson had been her greatest, and now I would spend the rest of my life passing it on.